Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. I have spent about an hour this morning going over all the trees and refining them. So now I'm ready to start working on the landscape. I'm going to start by peeling back all this moss around the base of the tree and expose the root base. All right, here I go. I'll start with the main tree here. I've got two kinds of moss in this planting. I've got this coarse moss that looks like ferns, and then I have the really fine velvety moss. So the ones that look like ferns I'll keep kind of in clumps so they do look like ferns, and then I'll add more of the velvety moss in the other areas, so it's broken up a bit, so it's not just the same moss covering the entire landscape. So this forest is inspired by the Avatar Grove in British Columbia near Port Renfrew. It's a old growth forest that's being preserved, and there's some fantastic trees in it. They're western red cedars, and that inspired this landscape. I would say that the total amount of time I spent pruning up this forest so far on the upper part of the trees would be about 8 or 9 hours. So, you know, a fairly long time. Forests do take a lot of time. There's a lot of maintenance. You're dealing with a lot of trees. You know, you have to keep them maintained or they start growing into each other and you lose your fine branching. So there's a lot of maintenance work with a forest. But they're very rewarding too. They're fantastic to look at. I just love them. Moss is starting to grow up the trunk here, which can look nice to a degree. I don't mind, you know, moss growing up a trunk. However, on a bonsai, it kind of spoils the bark. You know, all that moisture can rot away the bark at the lower part of the tree, and you get this strange look to the tree where it almost has inverse taper because you have the thick bark up here and then the bark's kind of rotted away, so you get a bit of an undercut. So it's always a good idea to get rid of the moss at the base of your bonsai. Now I think I'll have to get out the toothbrush, start brushing this a bit. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I'll let that dry and see how it looks. I really like this tree. It kind of comes out of this side of the hill on an angle and then it goes straight upwards. And this rock kind of justifies that. It looks like, you know, there was a bit of a rock slide and it lodged against the tree, bent the tree over, and then the tree recovered and grew straight up. So I really like that as a feature in the forest. Now, I can't find a better rock than that. Here's my selection of rocks, so I'll need to find one about the same size. Oh, that's a cool rock. So I'll get a few kind of small rocks, pick out a few that might look good in this landscape. I've got all sizes here, and they all kind of match each other, which is really nice. So there's the original rock. I'm going to take it out like that. So there's the size of it. So this one here is fairly comparable. I could see how that looks. Well, that kind of looks like it was tailor-made for that. Even fits in around the moss and everything. Okay, I'll leave that in place for now. I'm going to go further up the hill and remove the moss from the base of this tree next. So the base of the tree is somewhere down here. Yeah, I'm getting into some roots there. That's looking better. I'll get out my toothbrush. The idea for this planting was to have trees at various places on the slope of the hill. So I've kind of got that. I've got one off the lower part here, middle, getting up to the high ground, and then the high ground. I think my slope, you know, it's fairly steep here and then it's too rounded at the peak of this hill. So I may be able to either build that up with soil or maybe rocks up top to kind of continue that steep slope, kind of going up higher on the mountaintop. So yeah, I think probably rocks is best. So I'll see if I can find a nice rock for the top of the hill here and see how it looks. I've tried this rock up there. It doesn't look bad. It would need some more rocks kind of surrounding to make the terrain consistent. You can't just have one rock plopped on top of a hill. You've kind of got to have other rocks embedded into the landscape, so it looks like a rocky slope. Well, I'm probably getting ahead of myself with the rock, so I better keep getting this moss picked away from the base of the trees. It'd be kind of exciting getting some rocks in this planting. I mean, I had a few small ones. I don't want too many, or I think the planting's going to get very, very heavy. I mean, I can lift it fine now, but it certainly isn't the lightest forest in the world, that's for sure. Now I'm going to remove my deadfall. I'll position that in the end. So there's the base of that tree there. Boy, this moss is thick. It's really tall. Wow. There's a rock that was covered up by moss there. This tree's kind of jammed right at the front of the pot. I don't really like that. I may have to move that in future. Yeah, this moss is just really, really thick. Down here somewhere is the ground. In this forest, I want to do everything I can to increase the look of this slope at the front. So that'll mean kind of taking away moss at the front here, and keeping it high at the back so I get that nice hillside. So areas, you know, up front in that, I'll have to move the moss around. Like here, I don't want moss in this area because it disrupts that slope of the hill. There's something under here. Deadfall, yeah. So this moss just kind of peels off in layers. I'm going to save it. I can always reapply it. You can see that. But I kind of have to know where I am with all this terrain and that, especially if I'm going to be adding rocks. Okay, so that's looking pretty good, that slope now. It looks very steep from the front. There's a few roots sticking out here that I may have to trim though. Like that one. I think I will. Alright, I'll trim that root. I just don't want roots sticking up in midair. It doesn't look very realistic or miniature. Take that out there. There's a few other kind of root hairs sticking up here that I can trim back. I'm just digging out some soil from the very front of the planting to kind of give that slope, the hill slope, to go all the way down. Kind of maximize it. Yeah, so I've got to keep my hill, you know, fairly steep. So this is kind of in the way of this moss here, which is beautiful moss. But it'll have to get replanted somewhere else. So I want this slope to continue going down right to the front of the planting here. So I'm digging out this soil here. that. So it's a good steep slope to the hill now. There's a look at the front of the planting where I've kind of removed a lot of soil. So there's kind of a lip in here. The soil doesn't come to the just below the lip of the pot, it goes deeper, and that it keeps my slanted surface here going deeper, and it looks much nicer. It really looks good. So I've got to do the same theme over here. I'm going to remove these rocks here. Look at all the roots that have grown into the moss. Wow. So those will have to be pruned away. So there's the slope of my hill, so I gotta continue that. The hill slopes up, and then, as I said, there's kind of a flat spot on the top, so I need some well-placed rocks to kind of continue the feeling like the hill is higher than it actually is. So I'm going to try placing some of the rocks up there now and try and get some concept that works. I'm trying rocks out, but I think these larger ones, you tend to lose the sense of scale. You know, you see this as a giant tree, and then the rocks just make the whole planting look smaller. I think they're just too large and maybe not detailed enough for that kind of a scale of a planting. Because I picture a person kind of about this high here. You know, just a few centimeters high. Here's a smaller rock, and I think that looks more to scale. It's kind of got a cool cave feature too. Something like that might be quite interesting. Here's kind of a, let's say, small to medium-sized stone. That doesn't look bad up there. It's got enough interesting features that it looks quite miniature. So something like that might work well. I was thinking maybe what I need is some larger rocks placed in the back slope so the tops of the rocks are sticking up. That might give the planting more depth. I'll try that idea out. These larger rocks would have to be positioned kind of back here. Ooh, watch my mushroom there. I'm not sure, maybe. Yeah, it's kind of nice having the rocks at different levels on the top of the hill. It gives a lot of depth to the planting. So many possibilities that it's almost endless. I've been playing around with the rocks, trying to get something that looks good. I think the upper part here is looking not bad. Kind of. I've kind of left a pathway through here. I think that's important. I think when you look at a forest, your eye looks for pathways. I think it's just instinct that it looks for a way to get through or somewhere to walk. And I think that's part of the fun of a forest, is kind of exploring it. And I think your eye just does that naturally, looking for pathways and ways to get around things. So I'm not totally happy with it. I've got a lot of work to do. I've got to perfect these rock plantings, try and visualize it all. So I'll keep working away at it. Here's a look at the planting now. I placed rocks around, and I think that looks fairly balanced. I've kind of got like a sort of like stepping stones down this side, so you could climb down there. I've got a fairly large rock over on this side to kind of counterbalance all the rocks on the right side. I've got some rocks up at the apex of the hill. Not too big ones, not too small ones, and you know, some forward and some back to get a bit more depth back there. Maybe I could offset that one over here a little more. Yeah, that's a little better there. So I'm thinking something like this. I went back and I checked my reference photos of Port Renfrew, and there are rocks in the landscape, but most of them are kind of covered with dead fallen moss and that. So And I think that'll happen in this planting. Once I get the rocks planted a little deeper in the soil and the moss starts growing up again, I think they'll be less noticeable, the rocks, and they'll kind of blend in with the landscape more. So it'll be a little more subtle than you can see them now. They're kind of very noticeable. And maybe even at the end of today with the moss planted around them and that they'll look, you know, they blend in naturally, look really good. So I'm thinking something like this. And then, you know, if I don't like it, I can always rearrange it at another time. But I think this is okay for the first initial planting. I think it's got some good stuff happening. I may change that rock on this side. It's maybe looking a little too rounded. I decided to go for a smaller rock over here. I think it looks better. I think I'm happy with that. I kind of really like it, actually. I'm wondering if I need one more small rock over on this side. I think so. I don't like that. Something like that. No, I don't like that. That's not bad. Kind of placed over there. Maybe? Yeah, I think that's not bad. Yeah, I think that'll do it. Maybe I need one more up top on the hilltop here. Okay, I'm gonna leave it at that. So the rocks are roughly positioned now, and I haven't planted them. And planting, you can't just put the rock on the surface of the soil or it looks like someone just placed it there. You have to plant it into the soil, so there's soil surrounding the edges of the rock, so it looks like it's been there for hundreds of years. So that'll be my next task, is to get all these rocks kind of planted into the soil, and then I'll build it up with moss around them. So they'll look, you'll probably see only 75% of the rock that's showing now when they're finally planted. These rocks are fairly lightweight rocks. I think they're a limestone rock, but I better pick the whole forest up just to see how much weight these rocks add to the planting, to make sure I can still lift it. So here I go. It's not too bad. Well, usually I'm planting trees, but today I'm planting rocks. So I'll show you how I'll do this. So I've got a lot of moss under here that I've got to get rid of first. So I'll pull that out. I don't want moss underneath my rocks. I'll try and keep a bit of it here, like that. And then I'll come with my rock and I've got to embed it into the soil, like that. And then this one can be pushed in also, like that. That's pretty good there. Then I can get some moss and plant it around the rocks. So I've got some, these clumps are really thick, so I don't know if they're, you know, totally the right thing to be using here, but it's a nice moss. And you always want to push a bit of moss into the cracks here, like that. Maybe some in between these rocks here. And not all of it will survive, but you know, something will. Something like that, so it's looking much more natural now. And you don't see as much of the rock. It's not like totally in your face. It's a little more subtle. Here's a look at the two rocks I just planted. They look like they've been there forever, whereas this one just looks like someone just placed it in that spot. Yeah, so that one needs planting also. I'll give this area a watering just to kind of settle everything in place. Just kind of push everything down again. Make sure the moss is all kind of nicely planted. I'll continue planting all the other rocks. So I need to put this one in here, so I'll remove the moss. And then I can slide the stone in, kind of embedding it a bit. There's a lot of roots under here, so I can't, you know, can't get these rocks too deeply in the soil. I think there is pretty good. Just plant a little moss around it. That one looks fine. Let's do this one up front here now. Okay, so right now this rock, the idea is, again, is to have it kind of leaning against the tree. So I do have to level it out, so I'm gonna have to dig in here a bit. I think somewhere there is pretty good. That's a nice rock. It's got a few nice lines in it, a bit of texture. So there I go. So now I can kind of do a bit of terrain sculpting in front of that rock and get some moss around it. So you can see the rock now, it doesn't stick out as much. It's quite subtle. It blends in nicely with the landscape. If you look at this section of the planting here, the rocks hardly stand out at all. They just kind of blend in naturally with the landscape. They really enhance the landscape too. They make it look more miniature and more realistic. So yeah, I'll keep going with the rocks, planting them all. I had a look at that tree. I think I did have some birds that kicked a lot of moss off in this area. And there is some of the older roots are kind of dead, but there's a whole bunch of new roots. So I'm not sure exactly what happened, but it suffered some trauma, but I think it'll recover fine. I might have to add one more rock to kind of straighten that tree up, and that may be a temporary rock. Or if I like it, it could become permanent. So somewhere about there. It doesn't look bad there, that rock. I might have to reposition this one just a bit. Yeah, that actually looks pretty good, and it straightens the tree up. So I think that rock will be staying in the landscape. It's pretty well planted. I will build up a little bit of soil in this area. Yeah, I just need a little bit of soil around these to plant those rocks a little better. And to make the hill a little higher on this side. I think that will do it. I'll give that a watering. The rocks also stand out a lot less when they're wet too, because the color's darker. Okay, so I gotta put some moss around that area now. I think I'll put this piece right here. At certain times of the year, I have a lot of problem with birds kicking my moss off my plants, digging in it, looking for worms. Luckily, I think over the years, you know, because I don't have any organics in my soil, the birds tend to, you know, dig in here a lot less. I think they've learned over the years that there's no worms or anything to be eaten in the soil. So that's my theory anyway. I don't know if it's true or not, but I don't have a lot of bird problems. This tree is also a little floppy. I might need a rock behind that one to hold it straight too. Here's the back of the planting, and yeah, this one, it could use a rock just to hold that up a little straighter. So I'll put a rock there. You won't see it from the front, but it'll be there. There's a good kind of blocky one that I can kind of embed under here. Oh yeah, that holds it really well. And the rock looks pretty good too. Yeah, that's nice. All right, I'll give that area watering to get that moss all settled in. All right, let's have a look from the front now. There's a look at the planting from the front, and you can see on this side, the rocks are barely noticeable. And part of it's because they're wet, but when they're planted in there, they don't stand out. They kind of blend in with the landscape. So it's really important to plant your rocks. Make sure they look like they've been there forever. I'll spin my forest around and we can start working on the rocks on the upper part of the hilltop, right up here. So I've got to get all those kind of planted. Now I've got to get this one planted in here. Scrape away the moss. All right, I got to get this planted. Yeah, that one's planted quite nicely. I'll just give it a water and place a bit of moss back here. I've got all my rocks planted in the landscape now, and they've dried off so you can see them quite easily. My next step, I'm going to apply my fine moss on this front slope here. I have this tray of moss that's left over from when I did my root over rock plantings. So this is really nice fine moss, so I'll use that. And I'm going to place it, I'm just trying to think, do I want to cover the whole slope? I probably do. We'll start up here, pushing it firmly into the bonsai soil. All right, that's looking good. Got all that moss on the moss wall here. It's looking quite nice. Okay, I'll give that a watering and just kind of firmly plant it. All right, here I go with the water. And this water has some fertilizer in it. My front channel here filled up with water. I guess that'll drain away eventually. I'm standing back now having a look at the overall forest and composition. I've got some exposed soil on this side and some roots sticking out, so I got to fix that up. I think it's a little rounded on this side too. I like this side because it's fairly straight, the terrain. This side kind of, it rounds up and it looks heavy on this side. So I think I've got to flatten that out. Here's a close-up of that area. So I think part of it is the rounded moss, but I think I still need to take some off this face of the hill. All right, here I go. I'll start by taking the moss off this face. A lot of roots in there. And then I can try carving away some of the soil. I should use a root right there. So I'll trim away some of these roots that are a little high that were growing into the moss. Like that. The rest of these are okay. Now I got to cover this bare patch with something. Moss, and I think probably the finer moss would look best. I collected some more moss, so I'll give that a soaking. Just to soften it up. All right, I'll start applying the moss now. It's good and soaked. Push it into the bonsai soil. And I just got this moss from the front sidewalk. It grows in the cracks of the sidewalk, and so it's used to full sunlight. Everything is in place for the landscape. The only thing it's missing is deadfall. Branches that have broken off the trees, trees that have come down in storms. If you look at any old growth forest, you'll find lots of deadfall, lots of branches and trunks and that littering the forest floor. So I've got to add all those realistic elements back in. I have a few branches from cedars here. I'm going to try and find some more because I think I'll need more than this for the planting. I bought this cedar that's used for hedging material. It was on sale and it didn't look so good when I bought it. I think it was only $2 or something, and it didn't survive the winter. So there's lots of branches on it that I can prune off and use for deadfall. So there's a good one here, and maybe I'll just kind of snap it to give a more realistic look to it. Yeah, like that. Yeah, just kind of so there's another good piece of wood I can have in my planting. So dead trees can be useful. It's always good to keep them. You never know, for forests, you might want some dead trees in the forest, give it kind of a realistic look. There's always a dead tree somewhere in a forest. There's another one. Now, not everyone likes kind of a realistic forest floor. Some people prefer the clean look like I have it now. But I kind of like it to try and get as much interest in it as I can. I was looking at the reference photos, and usually the wood rolls down the hill and kind of gets lodged behind the trees like this, kind of. This one's kind of broken, but so yeah, they're usually kind of in place like that, and they kind of create layers in the forest. Put one here maybe. I think that's looking quite realistic, actually. Maybe a bit more down lower. I'll just wet all the new branches. They look kind of out of place because everything else is damp except for those. So see if they blend in a little more. And they'll get moss and that on them later on and start to look a little more matching the landscape. After 3 days of work, my avatar grove is finally finished for now. It'll be exciting watching it grow in over the summer, both the landscape and the trees. So I'll keep you updated on its progress. I'm sure by fall it'll be big and overgrown again and need more pruning. I really had fun working on my Eastern White Cedar Avatar Grove. The 3 days just flew by. It was a lot of fun. That's all for today. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me in the Bonsai Zone.